Hello, welcome back to the Case for DNA Part 2, To Test or Not to Test. I'm Renata Yarborough Sanders, and I'm very pleased to be back with you. In this session, we will explore examples of how DNA can be used to find or confirm genetic relatives. No matter what your objective is in taking a DNA test, there's one question that every DNA test will answer for you, and that is the question, where did I come from? No matter whether your reason for testing is that perhaps you're an adoptee and you'd like to find out who your birth parent or birth parents were, or maybe just who your biological family might be, or perhaps you could be the product of an American soldier or other soldier who was stationed in another country and impregnated someone there. Or maybe you know one parent and you've always known that parent, but don't know who your other parent is. Or, like the gentleman in the bottom left corner of the screen, you could be the product of artificial insemination, a sperm or egg donor, or any other technologically conceived pregnancy. No matter what, DNA will reveal to you where you came from. And so we go into the theme for this portion of the presentation. DNA doesn't lie. I'm going to share a few examples with you of actual situations in which DNA answered questions for me or for one of my clients about where we came from or where someone else came from. And so in this first scenario, I'm showing you exactly what I saw one day just 2 or 3 years ago when I was checking my Ancestry DNA results. I saw this picture of this young lady beside my initials because I didn't have a picture up there, and it said that we shared 377 centimorgans across 14 DNA segments. Well, that came as quite a surprise to me because I had never seen someone share that much DNA with me who I didn't already know or who it wasn't someone that I had tested. So I was very excited and I reached out to the DNA match using the Ancestry messaging system. And luckily, she responded within a day or two. I don't remember the exact amount of time, but it was no more than 2 days later. And so the match and I began to talk, and we found out that she actually grew up in Virginia Beach. She lives in Atlanta, but she grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia, just about 20 or 25 minutes from where I was in Hampton, Virginia. And her mother was from Norfolk, as was my mother. And so we began to think, well, there's got to be some kind of connection there because nothing else we talked about was matching. So I told her that since I was starting to kind of learn how to do this, that I was going to work with the data a little bit and I would get back with her. And so I did. And as I began to look more deeply at our matching, she agreed to upload to GEDmatch, and so that allowed me to do a little bit more work with the match than I could do on Ancestry, especially at that time. And I saw on GEDmatch that we shared 149.9 centimorgans on the X chromosome. So that was really narrowing some things down for me. Knowing that we did not get this as sisters. It wasn't enough. We didn't share enough DNA to be half siblings. I had to think, well, what are some of the other ways that we would have that much DNA shared on the X chromosome? Well, I could tell by the matches that we shared that she wasn't on my father's side. She was definitely on my mother's paternal side, which was the Hills, based on the shared matches we had. And so as I began to think through it and work through it with what I knew about DNA, I realized that for us to share that amount of DNA on the X chromosome and knowing that it came from my mother's side, it was quite possible that our mothers had been half siblings and that the X information that we got that was so plentiful came from a father that may have been shared by our mother's mothers. And that's exactly what it turned out to be. My grandfather, Daniel Hill, who had abandoned my mother's family when she was 4 years old, is also my cousin Andrea's grandfather. Unfortunately for her, she did not know this. She had a grandfather that she grew up with that she loved dearly, and her grandmother actually, the stories her grandmother told her kind of helped us with this because she actually took care of her grandmother in her last years, and her grandmother began to tell her things. Her grandmother told her that there was once another man that she loved very much and that that man died. Well, my grandfather, who turns out to be our grandfather, actually died in June of 1940. And Andrea's mother was born in July of 1940. So as it turned out, the grandfather we shared never actually saw her mother. But her mother and my mother were half sisters. They both grew up in Norfolk, just a couple of miles away from each other. They both attended the same high school, but my mother was 6 years older. However, her mother was actually in the same class as my mother's younger sister, who had a different father because my grandmother had married again. But you can look at us and see how amazing this is. This is the person whose DNA matched me initially. She is my half first cousin, Andrea, and this is her sister, Janice. And we met not too long after all of this was discovered when she was up on a trip to see family in Virginia Beach. And it was just so exciting as she began to get other family members tested to see how this was confirmed through DNA. The people you see here, the first two are her sister and her brother, so Janice and their brother named Michael, all matching me at the same level that Andrea was. And then these are two of their children, Angela's daughter and Michael's daughter. And so it's just amazing because I never had a first cousin except when I was 10 years old. I got a male first cousin. That's the only first cousin I have. So what a pleasure it would have been for us to have known each other. Well, for me anyway, having, lived 20 or 25 minutes away from each other. But nobody knew about it. DNA doesn't lie. These are my cousins. The next situation I want to share with you under the theme DNA Doesn't Lie is one of a client who you see here, a picture of her when she was a very little girl. She was born in New York and to a mother who was having some issues with drugs and some other issues. And so she was actually placed in foster care, but it was like a temporary foster care situation where her mother was still allowed to have visitation with her. Unfortunately, this young lady found out in her 20s that the people she knew to be her parents weren't really her parents. And so she began a quest to find out where she came from. And though her father that raised her was deceased, her mother that raised her, the mother she knew, was reluctant and refusing to give her any information about where she came from. So she began to turn to DNA. And she first tested with MyHeritage several years ago before Ancestry was ever doing DNA testing. And that was when she first reached out to me. And at that time, we weren't getting any leads that were going to help us find her family. But a couple of years into Ancestry testing, she finally agreed to do that for me because I told her the database is so much bigger and you're more likely to get a hit that's going to lead us to your family. And she had been doing some other things along the way, working with a private detective, working with some agencies in New York, but no one was able to lead her to who her birth parents were. So once she tested with Ancestry, it was quick and easy to see that we were going to find her family because she had a match that was 1,894 centimorgans over 153 segments. And this was all we needed to move us forward and get us rolling. And the generations were 1.5 to the most recent common ancestor. So I reached out to this match. The client asked me to do all the communication. She was very nervous about it and very unsure, and so I did. I reached out to the young lady that was matching her. Um, oh, I forgot something. So I reached out to the young lady that was matching her after I saw this information, which was that they shared 195.8 centimorgans on the X chromosome. Now, I meant to mention to you in the last situation that the X chromosome holds 196 centimorgans. And so if you look at that, they are almost at that line of 190. I think it's 196.1. And so this was very clear to me because I had learned about this already. I knew this was a half sister that she shared. It was a female, and that they had both inherited that unchanged, still intact copy of the X chromosome from their father that he had gotten from his mother. There was just no question about it. So I reached out to the young lady. She was very open. Turns out this father had several children by several different, like 3 wives or something like that. And she put me in touch with him. She checked with him first to make sure it was okay, and she put me in touch with him, or she put him in touch with me. And I was able to talk to him and to, verify some things. He lived in New York. He grew up in New York. And we talked about the time frame where this client of mine would have been conceived. And that would have been from like the very end of December of 1979 to possibly the end of January of 1980. And so he thought and he thought and he thought, and he was about 58 years old at this time. And somehow he remembered that in January of 1980, he was in the Bronx at his grandmother's house, and there was a Super Bowl party, or there was a lot of people over watching the Super Bowl, but that the adults left at halftime to go out somewhere and left kind of the teenagers in the house. And he had a liaison with a young lady down in the basement. He was very honest about it, and he still remembered it. And the thing is, when he told me this young lady's name, the surname rang a bell for me because there were names that my client's mother had given her that she didn't believe were real because her mother had been lying to her about so many things. And the name he gave was one of the names that she had been given by her mother. And so I was like, oh. So I took that person's name. He'd never seen her again in life. He didn't know where she was. And I started to do the detective work of finding her. Meanwhile, I connected my client to the man that I now knew was her father. And I forgot to tell you about the wonderful pictures he shared with me when I first talked to him. I knew when I saw him that they were father and daughter. But I connected the two of them, and they began to build a relationship with one another while I started to do the work of trying to track down the mother. So I need to speed it up, but I will say that after a few months of researching, I found several hits on the mother still in New York. I found Facebook pages, left her messages. Of course, we weren't friends, so they went to her other box. Left a couple of phone messages on numbers that I found. Didn't hear back from her until one day in September, on September 8th, as a matter of fact, of 2017, I was down at a beach house that I go to sometimes, celebrating the first week of school that I was retired. And on that Friday night, I got a phone call, and it was the mother. And she said, yes, somebody left me a message. Somebody's been leaving me messages saying that they need to talk to me about some family history or some genealogy or something like that. And I was not in the mood to kind of fool around with this because I was on vacation. And so I just went right to it and I said, yes, hi, I'm Renata Sanders. I've been trying to reach you. I'm just going to come right out and ask you, did you by any chance have a child who was born in? And she cut right into me and she started screaming and she was like, yes, 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 I had my child. I had my child September 8th, 1980 in such and such a hospital at such and such a time. Oh, where's my baby? And I was like, oh, she was the mother. And as it turned out, her child was stolen from her by the person who was supposed to have been her foster mother, her foster parents. And she never knew what happened to her child. And so, as it was, this was September 8th, 2017, and this was my client's 37th birthday. And because this mother always thought about her child every year on her birthday, she decided to brave up and return the phone calls. She suspected that the messages that she was getting from me had something to do with her child, but she was terrified to call me back. And so she did. And so I'm sorry, there's a picture there that I should have already shown of my client when she met her father, and you can see that they are basically identical twins. But here is the client with her mother. I was able to connect them that night. They both did all the same screaming and yelling and hollering, and they were both very, very excited. They now have a lovely relationship. And the picture you see here was when she first met her mother. She went to New York to meet her mother. And then another visit happened here in Virginia. And this is my client with her mother at church. My client sings at church, and her mother was able to hear her sing in church for the first time. And they actually invited me over to this service, so I took this picture of them. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful reunion. I want to tell you so much more, but time is of the essence here. So this very last one that I'm sharing with you is again from my own personal experience. I want to just point out again that DNA doesn't lie, and it can help you with proving or disproving family lore as well as your own research, what you might be finding in your paper research. So that was the case with me. I did not know anything about my family history when I started researching, and one of the things that I found out was that I descended from a European Hawkins line from Franklin and Warren counties in North Carolina. And in interviewing some of my elders, I found out that some of them actually knew a story about this, but they just didn't know the name of, what the surname was of the family that we descended from. So in my research, I found out that they were the Hawkins family. And my second great-grandfather was Nathaniel Hawkins, a white man who had a long-term relationship with my mulatto second great-grandmother, Anna Green, and they had 6 children together between 1864 and 1879. Well, fast forward to today, and I'm actually connected to more Hawkins descendants than I can count. Some are black, some are white, but they all descend from the white Hawkinses. And but Betsy here was one of the first that I met. That's my cousin Betsy standing on the other side of the chair. And this was the day that we met in person. She came to hear me speak in Lewisburg, and then I went home with her to Raleigh and got to meet her mother, her daughter, and her 2 grandchildren that you see in the picture. But this relationship was actually confirmed initially by my cousin Kelly, who did a Y chromosome test. He is a direct line male descendant from Nathaniel Hawkins. he did a Y chromosome test, and we put it into the Hawkins DNA project on FTDNA, and he was an exact match to this line with no mutations at all whatsoever. So it was no disputing that we were of a descending from this Hawkins family. But I'd love to tell you more, but I'm running out of time. But meanwhile, Betsy and I met. We actually met through Find a Grave and then put two and two together with everything else. And we now have a very tight-knit group of Hawkins descendants and researchers who you'll see on my next to the last slide. So in that case, the DNA proved a relationship, but at the bottom, you see two of my two Yarborough descendants. Now, they descend from the slave-holding Yarborough family, which last enslaved my great-grandfather, Calvin Yarborough. However, they do not descend directly from the man who enslaved him. That was like a great-uncle of theirs or great-great-uncle of theirs. So this is Hill Yarborough and his father, the late Charles Yarborough. And we met and had a lovely time getting together, talking about the research, sharing family history. I wish I could go into all they did to help me with my Yarborough research. But what we did is, even though we knew it wasn't likely that my Calvin had any genetic material from the white Yarboroughs because his James H. Yarborough did not acquire Calvin until Calvin was already 12 years old. So even though we knew that, we still kind of wanted to just prove it and make absolutely sure that we were not genetically related. And so they did DNA testing, and we are not genetically related. And so we were able to use that negative evidence to prove that we do not have a biological relationship, but we call each other cousins anyway, and we really love each other. Truly, we do. So DNA testing, again, is a useful tool for genealogy researchers. If you have as many family members tested as possible, you can analyze your family origins, connect family members, and confirm or disprove family. We must be willing to accept our DNA stories because DNA does not lie. Everyone you see on this collage is a DNA connection, a DNA relative of mine. As you can see, these first three pictures here, here, and here, these are all Hawkins and Haywood descendants who I work together with now. We work together as a research team, trying as hard as we can to put together the stories and connections of our ancestors' lives. Here you see Ari Wilkins, who's a very well-known genealogy speaker. She and I, as well as this young man here, are related through our Bryant line from Tyrrell County, North Carolina. These gentlemen I found through my paper research and then verified the connection through DNA research. These are two of my Hill relatives. And then these three are from Montana, and we share a second great-grandfather who happened to also be from Tyrrell County, North Carolina, James M. Davenport, another European ancestor of mine, whose daughter Emmeline migrated with her husband, Robert Payne, to Montana. And so their entire branch of the family either lives in or lived in Montana at one time. They're the only ones in the picture that I haven't met in person because I haven't been to Montana and they haven't been to Virginia. So, to test or not to test, that is the question. You've seen how DNA can tell you the truth of where you've come from and who you're connected to. So, what will you do? Thank you. If you'd like to contact me, you can email me at yarsan@aol.com, reach out to me through my blogs, Into the Light or Junior Related, catch me on Facebook at Renata Yarborough-Sanders or on Twitter at Nada Sue. Thank you so much, and thank you, RootsTech, for having me.